one more person still to take the exam, so I will give those back on Wednesday. Which is the
16th.
16th.
I got it from lumberjack for sure.
Yes. Wow.
Its ears are cat-like, but the rest of it.
Oh, clearly it is.
It's not. It's a bit.
Okay.
It's definitely a bit. But ears should be a little more round. For next time. I don't. I don't.
Okay, I need sit there if I turn the light off. All right, so we were looking on Friday at cardiovascular disease and different forms of cardiovascular disease. What the research shows us is that being physically inactive is a clear indicator for coronary artery disease in particular. It's a major risk factor, and some of the literature suggests that it as much as doubles your risk by being physically inactive, right? And one of the things you've got to be careful of when you're looking at this idea is we're not talking about being fit, we're talking about being healthy, right? So physical inactivity doesn't necessarily mean that I have to go and exercise at a gym or go on a running program, right? If you've got someone who does all their housework every day or walks to the shops or mows the lawn with a regular push lawnmower, walks their dog every day, right? Those things are going to count. And the more physical activity we do, the lower the risk and the incidence of coronary artery disease. So some of that is because we see these big adaptations in response to being regularly physically active. Right? So walking, gardening, the health benefits, to get health benefits to lower my risk, I don't have to be doing high intensity weight training and running or any of that. All right, some aerobic work is going to increase high density lipoproteins, my HDLs. The higher the HDLs are, the better. Right? We want a high number of HDLs and a low LDL. All right, so there's some indication that we can lower LDL and even blood triglycerides through physical activity. Right? We reduce blood pressure and hypertension, so could be quite a significant drop in hypertensive blood pressures if someone does aerobic type training. We see improved body composition in people who are physically active. There may be some improved insulin sensitivity, so then if I am pre-diabetic or if I've developed type 2 diabetes, then we see a mechanism that is improved with physical activity so that I don't have to resort to taking insulin. So physical activity statistics, somewhere around 40% of the US population, adult population, report that they don't do really any leisure time physical activity that lasts a minimum of 10 minutes. And when we look at the guidelines for health in a minute, you'll see that we need at least blocks of 10 minutes to impact health outcomes, right? So if all I'm doing is 3 minutes or 4 minutes, then we're not doing enough sustained work at any one time to really see an impact on particularly coronary artery disease, but other health issues as well. Only about 22% report engaging in vigorous physical activity that would improve your aerobic fitness, or at least maintain aerobic fitness if you were already relatively in shape. So 20 minutes or more at any one time of a quite high intensity. So we're dropping way, way down in the numbers now. Right, so less than a quarter of the adults in the country say that they're doing enough to impact aerobic fitness. And an even lower number, although these statistics are a little bit out of date, so it would be nice to think that this number may have gone up a little bit, because there's quite a lot of media about strength training and things now. But very few report doing anything that's going to be strengthening, any kind of resistance work. Right? So way back at the beginning of the semester, I said that you guys were a little unusual. All right? Most of you exercise in some form every day. Many of you do a distinct resistance program as part of your physical activity. Right? So you're very much in the minority when you look at adults in this country overall. And so sometimes I think it's difficult when you're so used to being a mover, it's difficult to identify or be aware of the fact that so few people move. Right? What's your role going to be when you go out from school? What's your role going to be in trying to change these statistics? Are you going to be a personal trainer? Are you going to be a PE teacher? Are you going to be a coach? So the guidelines then are set up with the main purpose of trying to improve health and fitness in people that don't have a lot of history or experience with doing particularly aerobic activity. But when we look at the guidelines, the most recent version, they're really trying to set up a program that you could use for most people. Right? If you're going to work with a very, very high quality athlete, you might have to step outside the guidelines. But on the whole, the people you're going to work with, you could use the guideline because they give us a range of activity level for each item in the guideline. Then within that range, there's quite a lot of flexibility to set something up for the majority of people you're going to come into contact with. Right? So when we look at aerobic training guidelines, then, let's see. Then we've got duration that we're interested in. We've got intensity, we've got the frequency, and we've got the time. Right? So my duration would be nice to look at a minimum of 20 to 30 minutes per session. All right? But the literature says I can break that 30 minutes down and I can do 3 lots of 10 minutes. As long as I'm doing at least 10 minutes, we see some health benefits. You're not going to see a lot of fitness benefits though if you're doing 3 lots of 10 minutes. All right? So it's really important that you understand what the goal of the program is when you're writing the program. Right? Is it for you? Is it for someone else? If it's for someone else, what are their goals? Because you can't set the goal. Remember, it's got to be personal. So, somewhere around 20 to 30 minutes would be nice. Right? And as long as my minimum thresholds are met, then I have some options. I could either do short duration, high intensity exercise, so I can do my 20 to 30 minute at a relatively high intensity, or I can do 45 minutes, drop the intensity down. We would see similar benefits. Generally, for most individuals, if they're fit enough to start, all right, so not if we're working with someone who's obese or severely overweight, right? But if when we do our pre-assessment, they seem to be fit enough, and if they've got the doctor's sign-off, remember, then it's probably better to aim slightly longer at a moderate intensity than do the short high intensity. Typical people who aren't athletes don't like high intensity work very much. Right? It's uncomfortable and it tends to be demotivating. So for an average population, you want to try to stay around the moderate or moderate high. Don't go right into the high, because you're likely to get a big dropout in your numbers. Right? The higher intensity exercise also puts your individual at more risk of having a sudden heart attack if there's some problem that hasn't been picked up. They're more likely to get hurt, so pull a muscle or do something worse than pull a muscle. And to say low adherence to training, ultimately what you want is this person exercising to some extent every single day, right? If we could, that would be great. So we want to have high adherence to the training program that you write. So frequency of training then, when we look at how often do we do our aerobic training, all right? So 3 days a week, absolute minimum. You're going to see some increase in VO2 max. It doesn't go up a lot more when you do more than 3 days a week. But my lactate threshold improves if we do more than 3 days a week. So if I can do 5 days a week of some kind of aerobic work, then we see the most benefit to aerobic capability and the most impact on coronary artery disease risk factors, right? More than 5 days a week, generally the literature supports the idea that more than 5 days a week increases the incidence of injury. So you maybe take them into overtraining, they get tired, they don't pay attention to what they're doing, they're out for a run and they roll their ankle. Right? So somewhere around 5 is good, right? right? Because remember that not everything has to be high intensity. So I can do 5 days walking a week. If you ask me to run every day, I'm not going to go, A, and B, I'm going to be sore and drop out. So what types of aerobic? Anything that's big muscle groups, okay? So I can walk, jog, I can run if I want to, but running also increases impact on the knees, the ankles, the spine, the hips. So that might not be a good idea to encourage running depending on who the individual is. If they're older. Cycling, spinning, so any kind of bike type activity. Remember though that it's got to be weight bearing if it's going to improve bone density, so cycling's great aerobic work for your heart, not so good for your bones. Same with swimming. Dancing, Zumba classes are really popular right now. Rowing, either literally rowing if you live near a river or the sea, or a rowing machine. What about if you're working with someone whose mobility or pain threshold for lower body is not very good and they can't do lower body work? What could you do? If you've got access to a gym, I think they have one downstairs. They've got those arm ergometers. So it's like a bicycle but for your arms. Right? Those are really good, and I know you can get little mini ones of those for the house that aren't very expensive. So if you've got someone who's in a wheelchair, or if you're working with an elderly person who really is not confident of their balance and they don't want to try something that uses their lower body, you could at least get their upper body going. Intensity. So we talked quite a bit about intensity over the semester, but when we're looking at aerobic training, intensity is the most important variable. Right? If I want to see benefits in aerobics, in my aerobic capability, we have to get the intensity correct. If I want to lose fat mass and I set the intensity too high, I'm not going to lose fat mass. Right? If I want to get aerobically fitter and I set the intensity too low, we don't see any improvement in fitness. All right? So it's really crucial to get that idea of intensity correct. Minimum threshold for someone who has been past fit enough to do it, 55 to 65% of your heart rate max. If what you're looking for is really, really big aerobic improvement, then you can go up to 90% of your heart rate max. All right, so this is someone who's healthy enough to start the program and be set an intensity that's quite high. 90% is pretty high. Okay, that's quite hard work. Again, if you're going to work with a competitive athlete, you could go a little bit higher, but not on a regular basis. Right? You're going to end up burning them out. So if I'm looking at my fat max curve, anybody remember what that range is on the fat max curve? It's about 68 to 79% of your heart rate max. So that's important when you look at this minimum threshold, because if you're setting their intensity at 55 to 60, because that's what they can cope with, then they need to understand that they're probably not going to see a lot of fat loss initially, right? They may have to get fit enough to be able to work hard enough to lose a lot of fat mass. What's the goal of the program? It's always the key. So the FIT principle, on Friday, there'll be an exercise you can work on doing this FIT principle. Frequency, intensity, time, type. E stands for enjoyment now. I love that they added the E. Right? So it used to just be FITT, but they put the E in because the E is important. It should be enjoyable. So when we're looking at using FIT, then we want to try to meet the minimum threshold in each of those: frequency, intensity, time, and type, right? So that we see the aerobic benefit as best as possible with the program. So how are we going to measure intensity? All right, percentage heart rate max is an easy way of doing it because it's free. And if you want to use a heart rate monitor, they're not very expensive. They can be if you get a really top of the line one. But to get a basic heart rate monitor doesn't have to be particularly expensive. So it's a very easy way to look at intensity. Right? If I'm going to calculate a percentage of my heart rate max and I don't have access to running a stress test, then we have to estimate heart rate max. Okay? The easy one to do in your head is 220 minus your age. It's not very accurate, can be off by quite a way. So you might set an intensity and find that your client or your school group aren't reacting the way you expected them to. They're complaining that they're working too hard because maybe 220 minus their age miscalculated enough for them. All right. Another estimate, and there's several different versions of this equation. There's one that's 207 minus something in brackets. There's one that's 208 rather. There's one that's 207 minus 0.6875. Right? So there's several different versions, but they're all around about this number. 207 minus 0.7 times your age. So again, it's an estimate, but it's a little more accurate than 220 minus your age. If you are reading in a coaching manual or a practitioner article and the numbers that they're giving you are based in VO2 max, a percentage of my VO2 max, then what you have to remember is that heart rate max is always a little bit higher. So if they say you need to train at 60% VO2 max, that's not 60% heart rate max. Right? So if you use 60% heart rate max, you're going to be well below the threshold for intensity for the response that you're looking for based on that program. All right? So when you look at this graph, you see here 70% heart rate max equates to somewhere around 50% of your VO2 max. And it's not until we get to heart rate max and VO2 max, VO2 peak that we see them equal. 91% heart rate max is about 85% of your VO2. So just be aware, depending on what the numbers are that you're looking at, it's important to identify whether the percentage is heart rate max or VO2 max. because there's quite a big difference in work output. Okay. So, if we look at a 20-year-old then, okay, and we want to calculate their heart rate max. So, I'm 20 years old, my heart rate max will be 207 minus 0.7 times 20. Right. So heart rate max estimate for a 20-year-old is about 193 beats per minute. So if we want to work them, say that they're pretty in good shape, right? And they've come and they've said, I want to get fitter because I want to run X marathon in a faster time in 6 months, right? So you're going to be looking for a training range that's going to push them pretty hard. Then the bottom end of their training range then is going to be 77% of their heart rate max. Okay. 77% of 193 is about 149. And 90% of their heart rate max is about 174 beats per minute. The nice thing on most of the heart rate monitors, if you get a watch or any of those, is that you can set the training range and the monitor will beep at you if you go outside the training range. Right? So 90% is pretty hard work. You really don't want to push it higher than that on a regular basis. You might have a training session where you're going to go all out at 95% for a very short amount of time, right? But if I'm going to set someone, they say, okay, I want to go out walking or I'm going to go ride my bike, how hard should I be working while I'm out on the bike? Then they can set the lower end and the higher end of their training range. If the goal is fat loss, right, I want to get thinner, then I'm going to change my range from 68% to 79%. And I'm going to calculate that, and I'm going to give them their training range that they need to stay within, and if the monitor beeps, they've got to speed up or slow down accordingly. It's a very effective way of achieving a weight loss goal, because you'd be amazed how once you're in relatively good shape, how easy that feels. And you have to keep slowing yourself down to stay in that range. But I've got an overlap. The nice thing about this is I've got an overlap between the top of my fat max zone and the bottom of my aerobic zone. So I can, within a little range, I can work both things. Right? So I could set my heart rate maybe for 70 to 85%. If I set that range in my watch, then most of the time I'm going to be working on my weight loss goal, and most of the time I'm going to be working on my aerobic goal. So how do I pick the range accordingly to achieve the goal that the person wanted? Does that make sense? Another way of doing intensity we mentioned in lab was using the Carbone method. Carbone method is based in heart rate, but it represents VO2 max. So if you're looking at a training program and you don't want to have to switch the VO2 numbers to heart rate numbers, you can use Carbone method to calculate an estimate of your VO2. So heart rate reserve is your heart rate max minus your heart rate at rest. And you can, it's lower normally if you use this, so it matches up more to your VO2. Environment and terrain. So if you're working on a rocky surface versus a flat surface, you'll see a big change in the percentage that you want to use. I'm just old-fashioned, I think. I really like heart rate percent because it's easy. Borg scales, remember you can use a rating of perceived exertion, but you can't use it with a beginner. So if you're starting with someone who's going into an exercise program for the first time, don't give them an RPE scale because they're not very good at estimating how hard they're working. You guys will be very good at estimating how hard you're working. Right? What number do I want? Am I working at 13 or am I working at 17 out of 20? Or this one is a Borg scale. There are some out there that run 1 to 10. Borg runs 6 to 20. The other intensity measure you'll see a lot in training programs or in articles is using a MET. METs are looking at how much oxygen do you consume at rest and how much oxygen are you consuming in the activity that you're doing, and therefore how hard are you working, right? How much more oxygen do I have to use? So resting oxygen consumption somewhere around 3.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute, depending upon your size. And so if I'm looking at a program and it says you're meant to work at 3 METs, then you will be working 3 times harder than that. Okay. I haven't seen anything specific that says you shouldn't use METs with beginners. But my instinct is that it's a similar idea, right? If I don't know how hard I'm working at rest, then how do I know what is 3 times more than that? I mean, we're kind of going back to the same idea as a Borg scale in my view, unless you've got a really good program. Say, for example, if you use a table and you give your person a table that says raking leaves is 4 METs, right? You would have to give them that table, I think. You can't ask them to estimate how many METs did you do when you were doing the gardening today, right? So again, I think physiologically, if you're reading exercise physiology articles, physiologically METs is a good measure of exercise intensity. Is it a useful everyday measure for someone using a training program? I am less convinced personally. But I also don't do personal training and I don't read a lot of training literature. So I just don't see how someone that with little experience would know how hard they were working. But that's my personal bias, right? You have to identify your bias when you're reading and learning things, and that's my one. There's also a talk test, which is a great test for a beginner, right? Because if I look at my beginning thresholds here, at 55% of your maximum heart rate, according to the talk test, you should be able to hold a conversation with your friend. So if you're going to go out and walk laps at the trail, then at 55%, you should be able to talk and feel like you're walking quite quickly. Right? So it's great for people who are just getting started, or for people who want to just train at the minimum threshold just to maintain their fitness level. They're not interested in getting more fit, they just want to maintain what they have. And they want to make sure that they're hitting their health benefit. So this chart that I found doesn't have METs on. I need to, if any of you see one while you're reading or studying, please let me know, because what I would like is one that has another column that has METs in it as well. So if you come across one, let me know. Okay? Where are we? Time finished? All right. See you on Wednesday.